Hey guys, welcome back to Punky's page. I've seen a few videos lately, and it compelled me to make my own on a certain subject. My cancer journey. Only I decided to do mine a little bit differently. First of all, I've been through it twice. Second, I wanted to give you a little visual aid here. Yeah. That's it. That is the record. I also wanted to talk about something that I noticed no one else talked about because they were still either right at the end of it or still in the middle of it. And that is the aftermath. Because there is an aftermath. Not for everyone. For everyone it's different. My journey began in the summer and fall of 1998. I was working as a volunteer at one of our local libraries, and I noticed that my neck was very stiff and very hard to hold up. Kind of wanted to flop forward. It was very hard to hold up. It hurt. First thing you think of in a situation like that is possibly meningitis, but it went on for too long for that. I remember around September it was really bad, and I also put it off to the fact that I was sitting at a computer for several hours at a time, typing in and cataloging all of the VHS tapes at the library. Yes, this was 1999, it was VHS tapes. And all that work was for naught. As it turns out later, because obviously VHS is gone now. So I kind of put it off to that too, you know. And in, I guess, October, it was when I first noticed a lump. Can you see my scar? I don't know if you can see my scar on the camera or not, but it's hard because the camera is showing me the opposite side, so it's hard to, but trust me, it's there. And it was large. I woke up one morning and I was like, holy cow, what the hell is this on my neck? Like, bulging out of my neck like some kind of alien. And so I immediately called the doctor's office. The nurse practitioner saw me. She said, yeah, you got a swollen lymph node, put some hot packs on it, here's some antibiotics. She did this twice. It went down a little bit, but it never went down completely, and you could literally see this thing. It was ginormous. If I wanted to look through all those records and bore you, I could tell you the size. But I'm not going to. So my mother was hospitalized in November, and the doctor was discharging her and told her, please don't go back to work tomorrow. She said, I'm not going to. He said, you really must be sick, because that's not like you. She said, no, I'm going to be at your office with my daughter tomorrow. And he's like, explain, you know? And so she told him. He said, you can see this thing. And he said, yes. She said, yes. He said, I want to see her before she leaves my office tomorrow. So I went in for my appointment, once again with the nurse practitioner. She tried to keep me from seeing the doctor by saying, well, your dad's outside waiting for you, and whatever. No, the doctor wanted to see me, I'm seeing the doctor. Excuse me. I got to listen to them fight, which is not something you hear every day, but he was kind of upset, and they were arguing about which kind of doctor to send me to. Because if you go back to my physical, the previous fall, I had well, maybe late summer, early fall, I had had severe anemia, and the iron was not helping. So she wanted to send me to a hematologist, which is a blood doctor. Hema meaning blood. And he wanted to send me to a surgeon. He said, look, this is hard. This has to come out. He just knew something wasn't right. You know, his instincts, many years of being a physician, told him that something was not right. So, he sent me to an ear, nose, throat specialist who did a needle biopsy and sent me for an MRI. First time I went in for the MRI, I flipped out, couldn't do it. My doctor gave me drugs. I went back and did it again. And when I went back to the ear, nose, and throat doctor, I was sitting in the office, kind of curled up. At this point, it's February, and I'm maybe January. I'm cold. I'm curled up. My mother said, what? She couldn't understand why I was curled up like that. Because we thought, in our minds, because right before all of this happened, the lump came out and everything, I had gotten a severe scratch from my cat. So we thought I had cat scratch fever. We were preparing for hospitalization and IV antibiotics. In no way were we prepared for what happened. So we went in to see him. My mom came in with me, and like I said, this is about January of '99 at this point. He says 3 words, or 4 words, no, 5 words, that I will never forget, and that I don't wish upon anyone. I would say I don't wish it upon my worst enemy, but I don't have a worst enemy. And those words were, I'm sorry, you have a tumor. Actually, I guess that's 6 words, but it's a phrase I'll never forget. Excuse me, you're what, and I have a what, you know? And he said, we couldn't find the end of it on the MRI. We have a 50-50 chance with treatment. I'm going, you know, in my head just, excuse me, in that moment, I was sitting in the ENT's chair, because they have a chair similar to a dentist chair, rather than a bed you lay down on, you know, an exam table. And I remember, I don't know if my eyes were closed or not, but I just remember stopping in that moment. And a daydream hit me of me sitting there bald on a bed, end of my life, trying to keep my parents from crying. That's what hit me at that moment. Excuse me. Sorry for the interruption. We're going to continue right on where we were. Okay, now, so he said, I'm sorry, you have a tumor. You have a 50-50 chance with treatment. But he didn't know what kind of tumor I had. Because evidently the pathology in the needle biopsy, which is way worse than it sounds, actually, he numbed it. My mother held my head. I didn't feel a thing. So, it did bleed on the collar of my shirt. So, I don't know. And I've heard that if blood comes out, that's a bad sign. And there didn't seem to be a lot of blood inside the needle, because I saw the aspirate, what he took out, because that's what it's called. It's called a fine needle aspiration type of needle biopsy, and don't know why he didn't get the type of cancer from that, but he didn't. And he sent me to a cardiothoracic surgeon. Now, I'm not naming either of these doctors because they're not worth it. especially the cardiothoracic surgeon, and I'll explain why. I saw him. He operated on my neck. He did not get any tumor. He got all myositis. Myositis is it's an inflammatory response, but it's garbage that grows around tumors of the type that I had. Unfortunately, there's also a serious disease that is just myositis, just that garbage growing. So at that point he didn't know what he had. He did know that he was able to remove and debulk some of it off of my trachea, because at that point, because it was so big, I couldn't put my head down to even tie my shoe. I was ready to pass out because I couldn't breathe. So he removed it off my trachea, and he said, it's also wrapped around your carotid artery, and that I was not going to play with. Thank you. Please don't. So he got nothing. He called and said, I want to operate on your chest. I want to do something called a Chamberlain procedure. Now, I don't know if I can. Yeah, I can show it. Well, sort of. Well, maybe not. But it's a cut that goes in between the ribs and goes in and gets a piece of whatever they want to get a piece of. Now, I remember waking up from the procedure, from the surgery, and being very upset. Stupid allergies, because I thought he was going in further up in the flat portion of the chest. He went into my breast, which freaked me out. And it was hard for my mother or anyone else to understand why I was so freaked out, but it's my breast, you know? And when you read the pathology report from that surgery, you see that he got a lump of breast tissue, normal breast tissue. He nicked the pleura, which he said he did. They collapsed my lung during that surgery. For those unfamiliar with these terms, pleura is the sac around the lungs that holds the lungs. The pleura essentially is the part, well, like I said, the lungs live inside of it, and it glues itself to the chest wall, which holds the lungs open, that holds the lungs from collapsing. And if you nick that pleura, air gets in between that and the lung will collapse. And that's what happened. So they reinflated my lung in surgery, I guess, and I'm just grateful I didn't wake up with a chest tube. So I spent the night in the hospital, which was the plan. And I had an x-ray the next morning to make sure my lung was still inflated. I can't even express to you the pain of just coughing the night before. I was coughing from places that I didn't even know existed. The cough was so deep, and the pain was just un-freaking real. And I don't recall getting any pain medication that night. I believe he forgot to order it. So he sends in his students the next morning before I go to have my, and I apologize for the noise, that's my landlord. There is something going on with the plumbing. So if I get another interruption, I have to take it. Anyway, and they came in. They evidently were told nothing, because I still had the first wound site, and it was leaking and weeping, and I am telling you, man, you don't know the smell, because it was leaking lymph fluid that was loaded with cancer cells. Cancer smells awful. You can't even imagine the smell. And it was right under my schnoz, right there. So you can imagine that it was not pleasant. And it was so much coming out, it actually popped a hole in the opposite side of the incision, because there was so much pressure from it coming out. So I had it running out both sides. And they said to me, when they saw the bandages, let's check your trach. I said, let's check my what? That's not a trach. It was my first surgery. So either they didn't read or he didn't tell them. First of all, he should have been in there with them. So, one thing I will say that the ears, nose, and throat doctor, the ENT, did for me was that he gave me the best oncologist in the world. I love you, Dr. Ward. He left clinical oncology to go and do hospice care, and I can't imagine anyone better for it. As sad as it was for me to lose him, but we'll get there. So I met Dr. Ward, and he had a few things in mind, you know, of what he thought it might be. And we still didn't have any answers. And he had become infected, my neck, where all that stuff was running out. And he contacted the surgeon's office. He refused to see me. The oncologist nurse is calling you, telling you this patient has an infection. And you refuse to see her. So, my primary care doctor saw me. Love you, Dr. Gilbert. He's now retired. And he gave me antibiotics for the infection. And we talked to him over email, and he said, I'll take you to the doctor I would see, and if you'll excuse me. Hey guys, I'm back. For how long, I don't know. I have a leak in my wall. But anyway, sorry about that. I was talking about the cardiothoracic surgeon and the surgery on my chest. Now, after I had that, my doctor said, I will take you to the surgeon I would use. And he took me on a Sunday to what was at the time Memorial Hospital, it's now part of the University of Massachusetts, to meet. Hey guys, we're in a different spot. I wanted to be able to finish the video, so I moved into my bedroom. So I went on a Sunday to meet this doctor, Dr. Gulati. Wonderful man. In fact, I recently recommended him to a friend of mine who needed surgery, and unfortunately, he retired. So he was not able to do the surgery. But I love you, Dr. Subhash Gulati. He said, I don't normally step on another doctor's toes, but if I don't get those staples out of your chest, they're going to embed. They're already starting to embed. Meanwhile, the cardiothoracic surgeon was off on vacation in Ireland. So he took them out. And he said, I feel a clearly defined tumor right there. I will take that out. By the end of the week, I was in surgery. Early the following week, I was in the shower, preparing to leave when my father got home for my mother's mammogram. And Dr. Gulati called. He gave my mother the results. I had nodular sclerosing Hodgkin's lymphoma, or Hodgkin's disease. Nodular sclerosing is the most common form of Hodgkin's disease, with what are called Reed-Sternberg cells. They're named after the doctors that discovered them. It's a type of cells and the type of Hodgkin's. It's the most common, it's the type of cells you see in Hodgkin's, and nodular sclerosing is the most common type of Hodgkin's, if that makes sense. Reed-Sternberg are the cells, and nodular sclerosing is the type. It's confusing, I know. I'd had several CAT scans up until this point, and the oncologist sent me for one for staging. And he said, because I was absolutely terrified of the idea of having a bone marrow biopsy. I'd heard horror stories. And he said, I'm not going to put you through it. He said, alone, what you can see is at least stage 2B. However, if we did a bone marrow biopsy, you're probably at stage 4. We're going to treat you as a stage 4. That means chemo. And so that's what we did. I mean, it was already in my blood. It was in lymph nodes everywhere, more than I even knew at the time. But it didn't matter. So I excuse me. Had the staging CAT scan, like I said, and he started me on ABVD. The first was adriamycin, bleomycin, vinblastine, and I want to say doxorubicin, but I think that's the other name for Adria. But anyway, it's ABVD. First line treatment for Hodgkin's. There are other treatments, other chemo regimes, ice, mop, chop. Plus I was on Decadron and Zofran. Zofran is a antiemetic, which means an anti-nausea. And I got through the IV. I also got Decadron, which is a steroid. And they told me, well, before they told me this part, they said that chemo is tough on the kidneys in particular, so they needed to do blood work to check my kidneys to make sure that I could even tolerate chemo, which thankfully I could. They then told me that I needed to wave bye-bye to my long, beautiful hair. First treatment that I had through the IV. I don't recommend that. That was horrible. But I hadn't gotten the PICC line yet, and they actually sent someone from IV therapy to come and put the PICC line in the room. What are you, crazy? I'm gonna drill a hole in my arm. But anyway, so that didn't happen. I had it through the IV. Hurt like hell. Then I go a few days later, I get the PICC line. It was a nightmare. Not the PICC line itself, getting the IV in the other arm because they put it between my fingers. Yeah. That was a scream that broke my mother's eardrums. But anyway, don't get an IV between your fingers. And they had put, I guess, the wrong size PICC line in, so they ripped it out and put a new one in, and when they did, I got a humongous blood clot. I was in so much pain, and I didn't know why, and they said, well, as you heal, you know, the PICC line should not hurt. Okay. And it's about a week later, and in the middle of the night, I'm like, oh, this hurts. This really hurts. You know, but you gotta put it up on a pillow and stuff, and keep it elevated. I'm going, this isn't right. And the middle of the night that night was torture. My mother asked why I didn't get up. When I saw her the next day, and I told her, I said, something's wrong. So she called my nurse. I did have home nursing, and the nurse said, use the measuring tape in the kit of stuff that you have to measure her arm and compare it to the other arm. She did. We were 2 centimeters or something bigger. It was bigger. And she said she needs to go to the hospital. So my mother's boss, who also has been a lifelong friend of my dad's, took me to the hospital. His dad was at work. And I had a vascular ultrasound, which is where they do an ultrasound that looks at blood vessels. There was one giant blood clot. So they removed the PICC line, which you didn't even feel them remove it, and inserted an IV to begin heparin, and I began a 5-day stay in the hospital, during which I had surgery to put in my portacath. That thing I would recommend to anybody, because it is wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Gulati, so much. Doesn't hurt to have chemo through it like it does through a standard IV. It is the worst part of that was that night in the hospital. That nurse didn't want to deal with me from moment one. She gave me my own sheets to make my bed with a blood clot, so I should have known something was up. And I didn't get pain medicine all night. I had hours of surgery digging into my chest trying to find a spot for that. Plus, I had to go up, because when they put it in, and then they go up behind your collarbone and get it into the vena cava. And it's like, should be an easy procedure, but when you have as much disease as I had in my chest, and as much myositis, it becomes a more challenging procedure, and it ended up going into my breast. I didn't have a choice. And I had no pain medicine at all. I actually called my mother crying. She was at work at the store. One of our friends got on the phone. I love you, Tim. Who was, he actually worked for the state lottery. Wonderful man. I'll tell you what he did for me after. Because it's part of the story. He's like, she's hysterical. I don't know what to say to her. And my mother was furious. But what can you do? You're helpless. It's well after visiting hours. So I called, and the aide came in and said, nurse is not going to come in and see you at all tonight. And I'm talking to my mother, and I'm crying, and I'm just so upset. So the next day, because the only time the nurse came in was to activate it. Now when they activate or access, not activate. When they access a port, you have, in my case, it's a double lumen. The lumens are the actual portholes. When they access it, I keep saying activate, access it, they put these round needles that look like fish hooks or upholstery needles, because they're curved a little bit, like an upholstery needle, and they put it in. Well, she came in and accessed it within an hour or two of surgery. No drugs, no nothing. I just screamed. She accessed both sides. It was horrendous. And I said, am I going to have to go through that every single time? And they said, no, you'll get Emla cream. We'll get into that. And I was like, okay, so... And she claimed he didn't order any pain medicine. They could give me Tylenol as long as he okayed it. I'm like, at this point I knew Dr. Gulati better than that. I knew he wasn't going to leave me without pain medicine. And my mother said the same thing. So, the next day, a very sweet doctor that was in for Dr. Ward came in, and as a matter of fact, I don't know how this happened, but the social worker for the hospital came in, spoke with my mother and I, and we explained what had happened. And that's when the doctor that was in for Dr. Ward, was a wonderful doctor, came in and said, you're moving to the cancer floor within the hour. And he wasn't kidding. My parents went home to have lunch, and I was on the move. And by the time I came back, I was on the oncology floor. They didn't originally want me there because they didn't want to scare me, you know. I was much stronger than they thought. So when I got down there, whenever you go in the hospital or go to a new floor in a hospital, they take your vital signs. They took my vital signs. My blood pressure was up, my heart rate was up, my temperature was up. And she looked at me and she said, you're in pain. I said, how do you know that? She said, all of your vital signs are up. That's a sign of pain. And that's when I said, I didn't get anything all night. I suffered in pain all night. She accessed it. And they gave me Tylenol codeine, or what's called Tylenol 3, which, as it turns out, I'm allergic to. I didn't realize that headache was a sign of potentially worse things to come until I talked to a nurse much later, and now I'm listed as allergic. And I went to sleep, and I checked my vitals later, and I was much better. They were very upset that I was treated the way that I was treated. And I guess that nurse got a stern talking to from her charge nurse. I don't know any more than that. It's like I said, 5 days in the hospital. It was an achy recovery, because there was a lot more work to be done than, you know, to get it in than they realized, and it took longer than it should have taken. So my uncle was actually there waiting for me, and my mother said he was sitting there like this, you know, because what should have been a half-hour surgery turned into like an hour and a half. So some people have actually had to have them put in their back, so it's not unusual. Hey guys, memory card just filled up. I do want to show you. This is what we're dealing with. So I had to put a new memory card in. Now we're ready to go again. Sheesh. I've never had to try to make a video in so many parts, but that's okay. Ow. Let's do this. So, as a matter of fact, I remember the day that I had my port surgery because I apologized to my father because it was on his birthday. So let's see, it was 99. It was April 9th, so 99. Daddy's 55th birthday. So, and he said, don't apologize. I said, well, I'm sure you'd rather be anywhere but here on your birthday. But, it was Dad. And he was where he wanted to be, with me. Like I said, it was a 5-day stay in the hospital, and then it was blood thinners, and telling a klutz to be careful. My middle name should have been Clumsy. I am telling you. Not that I had a middle name, because I don't. But if I did, it should have been Clumsy. Or Klutz. I can trip over thin air. Anyway, it is, I can smile now. It was tough. And at the end of that month, I was at home. I had had another treatment, and my mother was combing my hair. My hair was long. My mother was combing my hair. Actually, it wasn't long at that point because I had gotten it cut. They say you should get it cut short if it's really long, because if it's falling out when you're sleeping, you could choke on it. And I was starting to get a mouthful of hair. It wasn't good. And so a friend of mine took me my haircut. I still use the same or similar style as the style that I got, which matched my wig perfectly. And I remember my mother was combing my hair one day, and there's just piles of it on the floor. Emotionally, particularly for a female, that's horrendous. And excuse me. I was sitting in front of her, and we had the TV on. I don't know what we were watching, but a news special report came on, and all we heard and saw were a bunch of screaming kids running out of their school building like they were running an Olympic race. And that was the Columbine shooting. So here I am sitting there mourning my hair, and this comes on the TV and puts life into perspective. There are a lot worse things than losing your hair, and but it's strange that this was happening and Columbine came on the screen, There are certain things I remember from that time period and certain things that I don't. Because unfortunately, one of the side effects of chemo is chemo brain. My memory already is spotty, but, short term. But after chemo, if I don't write it down, I ain't gonna remember it. Or set an alarm, So yeah. I watched that in absolute horror, as everyone else did, and that's one of the things that sticks out to me from that time. The other thing that sticks out for me was in May. I was at my friend's house watching a pay-per-view, and while we didn't see, we heard Owen Hart die. We heard the impact with the mat, and we heard the stunned crowd. At first we thought, well, maybe, maybe he'll be badly injured, or maybe he'll be paralyzed, because we didn't know how far down he fell. You know what I mean? We didn't know if he fell part of the way down, you know, from part of the way down on his descent, or if he fell from the top. He fell from darn near the top. So we didn't know if he was going to be paralyzed, severely injured, or worst case scenario. It was worst case scenario. And I had gone downstairs to tell his parents what was going on, and they said, well, isn't that him? No, that's not him. Wrong heart. And Doug came running downstairs. Get up here, you gotta hear what JR is saying. He's saying he's gone. And sure enough, Jim Ross was saying that Owen had succumbed to his injuries, and it was horrible. So I clearly remember that. I clearly remember being there for another pay-per-view where I was so sick I ended up going home. The thing is, the way that chemo works, and it was funny, I heard another person say this on a different video. You have your, because with Hodgkin's you typically have it every 2 weeks for a 6-month period, which is 6 rounds, 12 cycles. Because each 2 treatments is a round, is a cycle. Each treatment is a round, and each 2 treatments is a cycle. But anyway, it was always confusing for me, so I always just said 6 months, every 2 weeks, and that's what it was. The week of chemo, meaning I had my chemos every 2 weeks on Thursday. From that night through Monday, maybe Tuesday, of the off week, I was sick. I was sick basically the whole weekend. And then from the Monday, Tuesday of the off week through the off weekend, I was good. Then we went back to the next Thursday and did it again. So it and also the treatment is 4 hours. It's 4 hours of sitting there. And it is cumulative. Like someone else said on here, it is cumulative. You do get worse as time goes on in terms of illness. And you know, vomiting and stuff. I was vomiting horribly by the end. Like vomiting before I ever left the chemo lab. Vomiting. And they my doctor's nurse, my regular chemo nurse, but she was my doctor's nurse, changed my prescription from Compazine to Zofran, which did make a difference. That stuff is good stuff. I just had some recently. I had some issues, I think related to my pancreas, but anyway, and one of the problems was nausea, and they gave me Zofran in my IV, and I was like, yay. And so towards the end of treatment, well, before I get there, at the beginning of treatment, actually just before I started, my friend Tim that I just told you about and a couple of other people arranged for me to have my dream night. My dream night was going to WCW Monday Nitro, going backstage to meet wrestlers, I was supposed to be in the front row. However, there was concern amongst my friends, but also amongst the company, for my safety being down front with a giant slice across my neck. So they decided I should be up higher, but in a place where I could see really well and stuff, but where I was safer. So, I have lots of pictures from that night. I will post them on my Instagram, Jericho Girly. Again, it will be in the permalinks in the description. Some of the pictures I have from that night that I don't think I have posted. At least not on there. It was my dream night. They sent me out to dinner. They sent me in a limousine. It was amazing. Unfortunately, the way things worked out was that WCW was doing a spring break thing where they were going to spring break parties, and so a lot of the guys weren't even there, or at least weren't even there yet. So I didn't get to meet Chris Benoit, or the people I really wanted to meet. I met Nitro Girl Shay, wonderful lady, wonderful lady. That picture I will definitely post. I'll also post her picture with Rey Mysterio. He is not in his mask. He wasn't wearing his mask in WCW at that time. Wonderful man, wonderful man. I also, the day that I had the surgery on my neck, with dressings and an ice pack that like had straps that you could tie it, strings that you could tie it around your neck, on my neck, I went to the Auburn Mall in Auburn, Massachusetts, because there is one in Maine, so I have to be clear about that, and met Bill Goldberg and got his autograph. Initially they weren't going to let me, the mall itself. They had taken someone in a wheelchair up, and here I am with a dressing and half drugged out of my mind, and they wouldn't let me. And I was upset. I was crying, and Bill Goldberg's bodyguard, I don't know what he was, Wall, walked up to me and said, "What's wrong, honey?" And I told him. He said, "You come with me." And he brought me around the back of the table where Bill Goldberg was sitting. The man sitting was taller than I was standing. He shook my hand. He was so kind and so sweet. He signed a picture for me, which he didn't even make me pay for. Those things are usually $25 a piece. And like I said, I remember he shook my hand, and his handshake was so warm. And it was firm, but not like, oh, some people hurt you. But, and he was just so kind, and if I hadn't been so freaking drugged, I would have remembered what he said to me. Unfortunately, because I had just come out of surgery to go meet him, I don't have an earthly clue what he said. I know he was very kind and caring, and he wished me all the best, and he was very sorry to hear, and like I said, he was unbelievably kind, and I wish I remembered the exact words, but I don't. After that, I actually went to Strawberries Records and got WrestleMania 5. It was the one I was missing out of my collection. I put it in, and I was very disappointed to find that in this particular version of it, they had edited out the Piper's Pit. I was not a happy camper. Because that's what I got it for, and to finish the collection, obviously. So I also got a bunch of Roddy Piper tapes around that time, which gave me something to do, because you can't do a lot. You have to wear a mask, which it's not fun in the dead of summer. I was one of these people at the height of COVID that had no problem with a mask, because I'd been there. Throughout the summer of '99, I was in a mask. I went to the store, I was in a mask. And I remember seeing people later on wearing masks, and I knew from my own experience what was happening, and said a little prayer. And fortunately, I did not lose all of my hair because my hair is so darn thick. I did have some bald spots. My hair looked horrible in my Christmas video that year. Unfortunately, those were all on what's called VHS-C, which stands for VHS Compact or Compact VHS. And the tape did not hold up very well. I wish it had, because my mom and dad are on it and they're both gone now, so it would have been nice if they had lasted. The celluloid had held up so that it could have been transferred, because I could have transferred it to DVD with some software that I had, and I had a thing that you hook up. It's about that big. You hook it between the VCR and the computer, and the software puts it onto DVD. I did that with some wrestling. I didn't get all of what I wanted on, but I also didn't know how to change the setting to make the DVD longer, so I didn't end up having to make 5 DVDs for one tape, which is ridiculous. You shouldn't have to do that. Because DVDs are naturally longer than tapes, but I didn't know how to fix that. My friend did, and she made a beautiful set for me from other tapes that I had. So I needed a VCR so I could do it. I did buy one. It did not work. Luckily, I only paid $20 for it, which ended up being a good deal. But anyway, I had stuff to watch and things to do, and doing genealogy, we went to cemeteries. Those people are already dead. They can't hurt you in terms of disease or whatever. At the end of August 1999, I became ill. And I remember I went down to the store, just the little store where my mother worked. I helped her out sometimes, because it was owned by a family friend, and and I just was not feeling good. I got a hot cocoa, sitting there, and my mom said, "You really should go home." So I went home, and when she came home, she checked on me. Well, I had put down my cocoa and I hadn't touched it. I'm laying under like 5 blankets, shivering. And she's like, "Get up and take your temperature." My temperature, it was 101 point something. It was not good. So, over 101, or over 100 point something, I was supposed to call the doctor. I called him. He said, "This is what we worried about." He said, "You did great. You're near the end." He said, "But grab your toothbrush, go to the hospital." And I said, "Are you going to meet me there?" He said, he was hilarious. You had to know Dr. Ward. He said, "Are you crazy? It's a Friday night. I don't want to sit in the hospital on a Friday." You had to know Dr. Ward. But it was wonderful. When I was in the hospital, he would answer, my father would call me, and he would answer my phone and say, "Angelina Wilson's answering service." It was so funny. He kept me with a good attitude. Like we would be doing genealogy on the laptop in the chemo treatment, and he would come in and he would say, "Yeah, my father started doing that, and he found a couple of drugs and he stopped." Just his sense of humor was so key to my recovery. And anyway, I went to the hospital, and when they finally get me back, they put me in an isolated room because I'm on chemo. Well, hell, I sat in the waiting room for 2.5 hours with people with all manner of illness. Now you're worried you put me in a what difference does it make at this point? So, they decided they're going to access my port, which I knew. So we put the Emla cream on. What that is it's a white cream, and it numbs the area. It takes about 20-25 minutes to do its job. So you put it on before you leave, like when you leave for chemo. You put it on, and then you put Tegaderm, which is a clear tape, more or less, over it. It's like waterproof, so the stuff can't leak out. And by the time you get to the hospital, it's numb. They take the Tegaderm off, they wipe off the Emla cream, and I highly recommend that. I really do. And they access the port. So they come in the room, this giant ass needle to access my port. I said, what are you planning to do with that? Impale me to the bed? I mean, this thing was ridiculous. And curved, but it was absurd. And they said, well, what do you usually use? I said, a 1/2 inch. Thank God I knew the size. They accessed me with a 1/2 inch needle, not that giant godforsaken needle you have, you know. They said, well, this is all we have in the ER, you know, or the ED, which stands for emergency department, by the way. Today, they're not emergency rooms anymore, they're emergency departments, because it's not just one big room anymore. It's changed. Anyway, this is all we have in the ED. I'm like, no. So they put it on the counter and they go to get, and my dad's eyes go bling, you know, because he's like, what can I do with that thing, you know? Even though he didn't say anything, because my father's kind of shy. They said, well, we'll have to get someone from oncology to come down and do it, because we don't have that, like I said, in the ED. So they called for a nurse from oncology, and one of the nurses from oncology, she was actually on her way out for the night, came down and accessed my port with the proper size needle. But it was actually really funny. My mother had gone to the ladies' room. When she came into the room where I was with my dad and I, she looked over on the counter and she went, what is that? I said, they wanted to access my port with that. She said, are they crazy? I'm going to impale you with that thing. I said, that's what I said. Waiting for oncology now. And so oncology came down, and I don't know why, but they had all kinds of trouble accessing my port. And like brown stuff was coming out, and they thought I had an infection in my port. They thought that's where my infection was. It was not. But as far as I know, I do know that I had surgery a couple days later to remove it, because that's where they thought the infection was. Mega antibiotics, like 3 different ones at different times throughout the day and night. That first night was horrendous. My head itched so bad that I thought I was having an allergic reaction to whatever soap they used to wash the pillowcases. I didn't know. And I had the worst gas pain in my back. Gas bubble in my back. And the young nurse that was on had never heard of gas in your back. I'm like, and I'm talking to my mother. She said she's never heard of it. She said, are you kidding me? So the next day, I had a nurse I had a few times throughout my stay. Really nice lady. Who was a little more experienced nurse, and I told her about the night before what I had gone through, and she said, I said, the nurse last night in Janice had never heard of gas in your back, and she said, really? I said, and the itching in my head, I thought I was allergic to your laundry detergent. She said, everything that's here is hypoallergenic, which is what the lady told me the night before. She said, no, she said, I'll tell you exactly what it was. She said, she may not be aware of this. She said, but you are having the normal side effects to one of the antibiotics. these antibiotics are very strong, and they do have some side effects. She said, we can mitigate that. We use the pump. Most of the time in the hospital now they use the pump. It's a square thing that clamps to an IV pole, and you take the IV tubing, you go down through the pump, you open a door, you flip up a little thing, and you open the door, put the tubing down through the pump, and you pull the handle down to close the door. What the pump does is regulate potential air bubbles and things like that, but it also regulates the flow so that you can do it at a much slower rate than you can do it if you were doing it by hand through the little turner knob. So that's what they did, and I never had those side effects again, so I was grateful. And I remember telling my mother when she came to visit me the next day, well, that day, you know, what they were going to do, excuse me, and that they were normal side effects. They weren't allergic reactions or anything. It's just, it can be tough on the body. And so a couple days later, they deaccessed my port, they put in an IV to continue the antibiotics, but they also, I have surgery to remove the port. If you could have seen the bruises on my chest from when they accessed it, I knew it hurt. But if you could have seen the bruises. And it was that same nurse, by the way, that saved me from the side effects that actually deaccessed it. And it was, the bruises were just, it was gross. And it took a long time to heal, too. And because they were doing it at the last minute and they couldn't put me all the way to sleep, they put me, I was awake. I remember the surgery, but I didn't feel anything, you know. I just remember hearing the doctors talking. I vaguely heard music, and the anesthesiologist was with me. You know, he had oxygen over my face, and he kept me calm, and he kept me somewhat sedated. And then I trust Dr. Gulati. And I heard somebody say a naughty word when they pulled it out. This is a piece of fill in the blank. And I knew it must have looked bad. And because usually they like you to have your port in for a while after, because, you know, if you do relapse, you still have your port. That's why I was surprised in one of the videos that I saw, the girl was getting her port out so quickly, because normally they don't do that. And because I was getting my port out, I had my last chemo treatment in the hospital while I was being treated for the infection, even though it was only a week from the previous chemo treatment. They did it anyway. And my oncologist told me, he said, this is not something we do. He said, are you willing, and he talked to my family, and are you willing to take the risk of doing it 2 weeks in a row? Because I was, at least in that hospital, I was the first to do it back to back. So, sure, you know, if you can help someone else by showing that it's safe to do in an emergency situation, why not? Plus, I don't want to get it through the IV. So, we did it 2 weeks in a row, and I was the first person at Memorial Hospital, which was becoming part of the university at the time, to have it done that way, with ABVD. So, and I'm glad I did, because maybe it helped someone else along the way, but they said there were no ill effects from it, she did fine, so we can do this for someone else that needs to get their port out, or whatever it may be. So I'm grateful that I was able to help in that way. In fact, I remember when I was having my very last treatment, it was the it was SmackDown, was one of the first SmackDowns. And they were actually in the city I was in, Worcester, Massachusetts, that night. And my nurse who was giving me my treatment kept coming in and watching it with me, saying, I've got to find my husband and my son, because they were there that night. I would have loved to have been there that night. But I couldn't be. But yeah, it was SmackDown. I think it was the first, it was one of the first episodes. It wasn't the first episode, it was one of the first episodes. Jericho was there, and it was nice to have something to watch while I was having chemo. Because again, it's a long treatment. And I remember calling my mother as I was starting the treatment, and I was actually crying, happy tears. I said, I can't believe this is my last treatment. You know? And so, it was. In December, I had a CAT scan, all was clear. My doctor went on to work in hospice care. I started with another doctor who, yeah, that did not work out. I'll say that much. And she ended up sending me to Boston because she got into a fight with my mother. Because there was something wrong after, maybe about a year, maybe less than a year, after chemo, something was going on. And they thought that my cancer was back and in my liver, which even with Hodgkin's is completely curable. But she wanted to give me Dilaudid and send me home to die. So anyway, it was a disaster. She sent me to Boston, and the oncologist in Boston determined that it was not my cancer, and after literally 12 vials of blood one day, it was insane. I'm like, are you going to leave me any blood to go home with, you know? It came out that I had an autoimmune disease. Oh, lovely. So they sent me to a liver doctor, a hepatologist, which is also a gastroenterologist, because the liver is part of the digestive system, the gastrointestinal system. So hepatology is part of gastroenterology. And his name was Dr. Michael Team. I loved Dr. Team. I saw him a million times before it became too difficult for my father to drive me to Boston. So anyway, I met with him, and I had had a liver biopsy back in Worcester, which was a complete disaster. I didn't know why at that point, until he said, until he called me on the phone right before his liver biopsy in Boston. And I said, do you want me to drink a glass of milk that morning to get my gallbladder out of the way? And he said, what? And I said, well, that's what they had me do. And he said, well, no wonder you were in pain. It sent you into a gallbladder attack. No, do not do that. And so, because I was so scared, because I was in pain days and days and days afterwards, and I shouldn't have been. He called me a couple times after his, and I was fine. Was the spot tender? Yeah, of course. They put a big needle in your side and yank out your liver. I know that sounds much worse than it actually is, because they sedate you pretty well, and they numb it, and you don't feel anything, you know. But you have to lay there for a while still, so that there's no bleeding or anything, because you did just get a hole poked in your liver. Had it done a couple times, but it was no big deal. Would probably rather do that than have a colonoscopy, to be quite honest with you. Just the prep. The colonoscopy itself, no big deal. The prep is horrendous. But that's another story for another day. And he was able to determine that I had autoimmune cholangitis. Come to find out, I likely developed this autoimmune disease as a result of chemotherapy. And that's one thing that people, when they talk about their cancer journeys, don't talk about is the after, because most people are talking about it during or directly after. I'm talking 20 years later here. 23 years later. So, for me, it's later enough that I know what happened later. You know what I mean? And I'll admit I was scared, because 10 years after that diagnosis, you're usually looking for a new liver. Well, it's been 20 plus years now, and I am still stable on my medication. So, thank you, Lord. In 2010, I found another lump in my arm. Turns out I had another kind of cancer, completely different, called DFSP, dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans. I will post a link in the description of this video to my website explaining the disease. I did find a support group. I was diagnosed more quickly than a lot of people because I had already had cancer, so any lumpity bumps were taken a little more seriously. So my doctor saw it, and he said, that grows at all, changes, or anything, because it was bruised. Let me know. And so, that was in November at my checkup. It was still there in June, and then about 2 weeks after my checkup, it blew up. Like, big. One weekend. And I called him on Monday. He saw me right away, and I remember he's looking in a book, trying to map out the anatomy, and he ended up throwing the book. He said, I'm just calling Dr. Gulati. So Dr. Gulati operated on it twice. He was not able to get clear margins, so he sent me to a dermatologist to have Mohs surgery. Mohs surgery is named after Dr. Frederick Mohs, who pioneered the procedure where they literally take pieces, look under the microscope, take another piece, until they get clear margins. It's usually done for skin cancers, but this cancer is a sarcoma, so it is a skin cancer, but it's deeper. So she went all the way down, scraped the bone, took out a chunk of muscle that was dead. She said it just was not the right color. But yeah, if you've been chopped up a couple of times, you might not be the right color either. And so, as a result, I have nerve damage, and my arm does not straighten all the way. I mean, I can if I force it, but it hurts. There was no chemo or anything for that, and they decided against radiation because they already had signs of arthritis in the elbow, and radiation destroys joints. Just so you know, if you have to have radiation to a joint, you're going to get arthritis, more than likely. But hey, arthritis is better than dead. Fortunately, DFSP is generally not a deadly cancer. At that time, there wasn't treatment in terms of chemo or anything like that. They did radiation, but I didn't get radiation. but they did use it as treatment. It was not long after that they began using the drug Gleevec. And I found this ironic because drug was originally created for a form of leukemia that my father lost his best friend to. That could have saved his life had he gotten leukemia at a different time. But unfortunately he had it in the 80s. And but I found it ironic that the same drug that could have saved his life had he gotten his disease later on could, if mine came back, potentially save my arm. And I thought, and I thought about it, and I looked up to heaven and I said, how cool is this, Chucky? I love you, Chucky. And I just thought it was God. And a year after that cancer, I wound up having a hysterectomy. Fortunately, there was no cancer there, just a fibroid and a very messed up right ovary. To this day, I have chemo brain issues. I have almost no veins. That's one thing the chemo does, it destroys your veins, and I didn't have good veins to begin with. So, and I have one arm that can be used because of the blood clot and then the cancer in the same arm, and lymphedema in that arm from the cancer. My oncologist, by the time that I had the second cancer, was an oncologist out of Milford, Massachusetts, who worked for the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute at their Worcester office. Not their Worcester office, their Milford office. And his name is Dr. Michael Constantine. And I remember when he was releasing me from care the second time, because he took over my care and did lots of gallium scans and stuff to make sure that my tumors were still gone. And after 5 years, he had released me from care, and when he was releasing me the second time from the DFSP, he playfully hit me with my file and said, "The third time is not the charm. I don't want to see you again here. I want to see you out there at a party or a store or something." So that's what we're hoping for. So far, so good. I had genetic testing as well, because I had two so vastly different cancers. So I was tested for Lee from Moni. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, which is a syndrome that if you have two very different cancers, they're concerned about this genetic syndrome because it puts you at higher risk and you have to have more scans, more closely watched. I also had the BRCA1 and 2 because breast cancer runs in the males in my family. My great aunt had it, and two of my male cousins had it. Three of my male cousins, sorry, had it. And when talking to the oncologist about that, it's less in males, but it does happen. And he said, I said, well, I was always told that two of my male cousins got it because they were linemen and the electrical lines. He said, don't think so. He said, you need to be tested for the BRCA gene. Especially with a, considerable history of male breast cancer. So, on both sides of my father's family. So it came back negative. Had I tested positive for BRCA1 or 2, my father would have had to test it, because it was his side of the family that we were dealing with. Unfortunately, they have a fund that helps to test people, so they were able to use that fund to test both of my genetic tests, and I'm grateful to Dana-Farber for that, and I'm grateful that none of them were positive. So I was just unlucky. And by the way, for a female to get Hodgkin's disease, I am told that I had a better chance of getting struck by lightning and winning the lottery in the same day. Okay. You know, just so you know, it's unusual, because Hodgkin's is typically, and girls do get it, but it's typically a male cancer in the teens to the early 20s, early to mid-20s. Typically, and then it takes a break, and it's 60 and over. Typically. And typically, it's male. I was 24 and female. And DFSP literally affects between 1 and 3 per million people worldwide annually. Again, what the hey? Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that I shed some light on the later on of the cancer journey, because I know that that doesn't often get talked about. So I wanted to, and like I said, that's my journey. This book is so full that the binder came off, literally split off. I even have my genetic tests right here. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you next time here on Punky's page, where we vlog, we talk, we do everything. Next time I'm going to review my new DVD once I finish watching it. Christopher Daniels' Ring of Honor Straight Shooting. And I will see you for that. Goodbye and God bless.